Thanks everybody for joining. Welcome to today's webinar. We'll start straight away, and over to you, Colin.
Thanks very much, Hugh, and thank you to everybody for joining today's session. So we're going to be talking about how to build secure APIs in VS Code with instant API security testing. So a little bit about myself, people who aren't familiar with me, my name's Colin Dominy. I'm the Chief Technology Evangelist here at 42 Crunch. I've got a background in doing DevSecOps and AppSec for many, many years. I get to talk about API security, and I also curate the API-security.io newsletter, which we believe is one of the top resources for learning about API security. So look at the agenda. We're going to talk about security testing in the IDE, and then focus on what the 42 Crunch VS Code extension can do for you. We've got a live demonstration. We're going to look at both what we can do with auditing APIs and then also scanning. This is a new feature, new functionality that's been added to the plugin, which we think is pretty exciting, and we're keen to share with you. And then importantly, if you like what you see, and we certainly hope you do, how to get started in your own. We've got free versions of the products that you're going to see on display today. You can go and help yourself to these, get them from the marketplace, and get active and start securing your APIs. Perspectives on security testing in the IDE, right? If anybody's been involved in security for a while, security testing in the IDE is quite a controversial topic. This is from an ex-colleague of mine, currently over at GitHub. There's a lot of thought leadership on what good security testing tools look like. And the position here is, when we're thinking about what we do in the IDE, jamming security tools into the IDE can have some pretty negative consequences. It's something that developers don't necessarily like. You can distract developers. It can be quite hard to do this at scale, right? If you want to roll out something, it's quite hard to deploy at scale. And then that third point, I think, is quite important. And we cover this a lot with the 42 Crunch approach, because we've got a really good solution to this, right? It's not sufficient to allow your developers to only scan in the IDE. You, of course, have audits. You've got security and compliance requirements. You've got to scan later in the pipeline stage. And we're going to talk about how well we believe 42 Crunch has solved this problem. And the scanner that you use in your IDE is exactly the same scanner that you would be using in the CI/CD process. Okay, so they are exactly the same thing, right? Because this issue of having developers doing something in the IDE and then they use a different tool or a different version of a tool later in the phase, and then they get blocked. Very, very frustrating, bad user experience for developers. So definitely don't be doing that. Keith makes a good point there. What developers want is they want results in the IDE. They want value. They want things that are actionable, and that they can go and do something with and basically improve the quality of the work that they're turning out. Right, so that's maybe a slight negative perspective on this, that screenshot, because that's pretty much the first IDE plugin that did security. All right, this is going back over 15 years now. And to be honest, that was quite an experience to use. It wasn't a great tool. The results weren't terribly accurate. It was quite a distraction. It took a long time to run. That is quite a frustrating experience. And I think this is kind of universal when we talk to developers, why they don't like being made to use security tools. They're distractions. They create too much noise. Anything that's going to generate false positives. If you're using compiler and you're putting compiler output into your debug console, into your editor console, one of the first things people do is go and turn off all the warnings, because they don't like that noise. They don't like screens and screens and screens of data scrolling past them. And then if your plugin is poorly engineered and breaks your code run debug cycle, this is also a frustrating experience. If you slow people down, if they can't just click a button and immediately run because they're doing some kind of security test, that's not a good experience either. And then often they're not configurable, but you can't change the way they behave. You can't change the type of rules or the way the product runs. But really the killer lack of feature is the fact that they don't generally deliver value. And I hope that within the next 20 minutes, you're going to see some awesome value coming from what we've done here at 42 Crunch. Little bit of perspective, if you just humor me for the next 5 minutes while we talk through this. So I think the way that we test software has changed, and it's all been driven by the decomposition of the monolith and the move to microservices or API-centric development. What I'm trying to present on that timeline is the fact that in the old days, we used to build a UI, an application, and a database. We kind of build them on parallel lines, and we'd integrate everything quite near the end of the build cycle and then push that out to production. Now, what this meant was that, firstly, the first problem you had here is your first test candidate only became available very late in the day, right? And also, primarily, if you were doing IDE testing, your IDE testing that you were doing, you couldn't really do anything hugely useful with that, right? Because you were either testing elements of the UI, you were testing the application, or you were testing the database layer, sort of all in isolation. So IDE testing, I don't believe was particularly valuable here. Now, particularly when you're testing things like security, which often rely on the interaction and end-to-end joined upness or lack thereof of your different components. Security testing in the IDE, where you were just testing an individual file, not particularly useful, right? So that's my perspective. It's not entirely accurate, but as a working model, as a straw man, let's think about that. Let's think about how we used to do this. And now, of course, APIs and microservices are changing everything. So now, instead of having that traditional 3-tier architecture, I've just shown a very simple 3 API model. Now, your APIs, because you're building your APIs against a contract, you've got an open API specification, which is defining what your API does, right, and how it should be behaving. You're able to start building working candidates of your API right up front, right? And even if you don't have a backend with realistic data, it's very easy to mock or stub those using any number of the fantastic tools that we have available for API development. And actually, while I'm talking through this webinar, we are going to be doing a series. This is really the first part in a series of how the embracing of the open API standard can really help and optimize and facilitate great API development. Right, there's lots of things we can do if we have an open API definition. We can do things like testing against mocks and stubs. So the idea here is that as we start building out our API almost from day zero, we can start testing that. So we can audit the contract to see if the contract is well defined, and more excitingly, we can actually test against the back-end implementation. So we no longer have to wait until somewhere down the line here at a release candidate to do testing. We can do that in the IDE right up front against those APIs as we build them out, right? So this really flips that model on its head, right? We don't have to wait until we've got a more or less complete and fully built piece of software. We can get, we can get working straight away, testing. I'm going to talk about the 42 Crunch IDE extension. So a little bit of promotion of what the extension looks like. It's the #1 extension on the Visual Studio Marketplace. We've had the good fortune of having the folk at the marketplace promote us and feature us at the moment. We're hitting 508,000 installs at the moment, and it's a very popular plugin for doing API development. So it's demo time. So wish me luck as we get into the demo. Let's just take a whistle-stop tour of the extension itself. So if I do Swagger, we've got the extension plugged in, it's installed. The usual thing that we'd want, you can find that on the marketplace. Now, there's 2 elements to this. So firstly, there's the ability to, let's call this an Explorer. I think we call this the Explorer view. And what that's doing is it's showing the structure of your open API file. So going to make the assumption people pretty much know what an open API definition specification looks like. And this is a quick visual view of being able to navigate around this. So the type of things that you'd expect, being able to click, navigate to endpoints to be able to look at the different methods. You can also here, you can go and add a new path. You can copy the JSON pointer. You can create the server component and then components. This is probably the thing that people are most likely to be doing. It's a nice quick way to being able to navigate around the file, and there you'd be able to create new parameters, responses, and the like. So just think of this as a quick way to edit open API files. We can also do things like we can create a brand new file as well. Let's just go to that. We would be able to create a new file from scratch. So that's the Explorer view. What we can also do here is we can look at platform components. So if we have things defined on the platform, if you're working in a team, you're able to see your API collections and that right in the IDE, and those are coming from the platform. But most of the time, we're going to be focused around what that extension can do. Now, what I've done, just for context, I've got an application running. It's the one that we often use in demos. People have probably seen it's the DevSlop project Pixie photo viewer. Goes by a couple of names. We've got a version of that running. I think what I'm going to do is just to orient people around what we're going to do. I'm going to look at the, this is the Pixie app running in Postman. So what I'll do is I'm going to log in. So we've got being able to log into the API. So the API is working, it's running on a local machine. We can do things like go and get user information, right? So the API is running behind that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to VS Code and I'm going to look at the corresponding open API definition. So if you navigate into the open API definition, you're able to read the definition of that. But you'll notice now we've got, let me just highlight that because that is tiny and I can't change that. You've got scan and try it. Now, these are the operations that we have that help you test this endpoint, this API in real time. The try it, well, let's click it and see what it does. So what this is doing is it's popping up a dialog, which has got basically, it's constructed this URL from the definition and the paths. It's seen that we're taking a body that has a user and a password. It's populated, pre-populated for us, and it's allowing us, that's SSLs. SSLs not supported. So what we can do here instantly in the IDE is log in. And as expected there, we're not logging in because we've got invalid credentials. Right, we've just run that immediately in the IDE. So super quick. Right, being able to run that immediately. What I am going to do is I'm just going to go back to Postman and just show you that working. Log in. I'll just copy that, and we'll send that again. We've logged in, and what we've got there, we've got a JWT token come back to us. All right, so now we can start taking a next step and being able to look at that. So what I'm doing is I'm just copying that because I will need that token in a moment. I'll just turn that view off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and register for this endpoint. So if I register a new user here, I provide passwords and credentials. Let me register him. So the user's already registered. That's fine. That I was expecting that. Let's make a new one called number 5, and we call him Pixie user 5. So I will register. So I've got a registration token. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, scan it. So I've done try, that's a one-off. And now let me hit the scan button. Now what is happening here behind the scenes, you'll see the console window is going to pop up in a moment. One hopes. Right, so we're getting ready to scan. Now what we've done is it's constructed a body. When I hit scan, what will happen is, watch that bottom window. We are now using a Docker container. Right, that's what's happening there. We've got the latest one. And what we've done is we've run a test against the API. So let's see. So this one failed. I'll get to that in a moment. And that is because the user's already registered. So to explain briefly, and I will, without going into the finer details of what's happening here, we've done a Docker run. We provided a scan token, right, which is pointing to the 42 Crunch platform. We look at the platform in the last section here. And we run a scan. So what's happening in the background is That is exercising that API. And what we've got here is we've got what we call a happy path. Think of a happy path as the way you expect the API to behave, right? If you made a new API and you had an endpoint called register, you would expect if you gave it the correct parameters and you hit send and you call that API, you would get a pass, you'd get a 200, right? And we didn't in this case, we got a failure, right? 400. So what's happened is the scanner is now effectively given up. The scanner said, well, I can't get the thing that should work to work, so something is wrong with that API endpoint. Please would you go and have a look, see, and investigate. And when you have a look at the error code coming back, all right, we got a 400, and there's the error message, user is already registered, right? So that's pretty obvious. So we'll go, right, let's fix the thing, and we'll call it user 6 for argument's sake, right? Pixie user 6. And now we'll rescan, right? And just be aware of the times here, how quick these things are running, right? That's running a Docker container, and it runs almost immediately. The results have already come back. What have we got here? Now notice the difference here. We've got a happy, the happy path test has passed. We've got a 200. We've got a registration token, right? So that's exactly what I demonstrated to you in Postman, right? We've been able to do that same thing right from the IDE. And we've also noticed that we've got issues, and we've got a lot of issues. So let's go and have a look at those. So we have a long list. This is a good endpoint to hit because it generates a number of issues. So let's start going through these one by one. So when you implement an API, there's a number of things that can go wrong. You can accept data that you shouldn't accept. You can return data that you shouldn't return. This issue that's been found, the scanner discovered that the API endpoint was actually able to support verbs. So these are your HTTP verbs like get, put, delete, that it shouldn't, right? These so lesser used, lesser popular, less common HTTP verbs can be quite troublesome for APIs, because that's one of the first things, particularly the delete operation, right? So hackers will often go and find a method and then they'll call it with the delete operation, right? And if that was referring to a user, you can often do things like inadvertently delete that user. Now, what's happened? Let me make sense of this error code that's coming back to you. So the HTTP code received was a 404. It should have been a 405 that we should have got, and the response. So basically, in the API definition, we didn't. We got an unexpected result. We should go be blocking those operations. So that's the first thing, and we can see it's not only the delete operation, it's pretty much all of the other verbs where we returned an incorrect response. So we need to fix that in our code. Let's have a look at another one here. So the scan sends a request containing a string value instead of the expected type, right? So that registration expected to get a JSON body with the registration details. And what we did here is we just sent it hello world. Right, and what happened is the request failed, but unfortunately here we dumped a lot of debug information into the window. Right, you can see what's happening, what's coming back here. We've given quite a lot of detail. We've done a stack dump firstly, which is not good, and that's we returned to the API. So we've got an issue with the way that this function has behaved. Right, we've effectively been able to provoke an unexpected response from this. This is data leakage. This is you giving away details of what that stack looks like. You know, if an attacker were to look at that, they would see, oh, you're running Node. You know, they know exactly what you're running. So that isn't good, and that's all quite easily fixed. Right. So sends a request containing. So here we've probably done, yeah. So we've sent an integer value in. Let's just see, we got the same thing. So it's the same class of error. Instead of a string, we've sent an integer. Let's have a scroll down. What else we have got? So we've been able to really throw up a lot of issues with that by giving it invalid input data. Right, we've given it an array. It didn't respond. We've given it a bool. Yeah, right. Yes. So let's have a look at this one. So Yeah, so what we've done here is we've given it JSON data, but we haven't given it in the correct format. So what's happening is the response is coming back and saying, you didn't give me a valid username and password combination, right? And you've returned a 422, which wasn't in the definition. So let's go and have a look at, so that's register. Let's have a look. We've defined, yeah, so register actually only has a response code 200 and 202 defined. So where we know we're going to get something like 422, we should go and add that to the definition. The end game here is to make sure that basically each endpoint that you test returns 100%, it returns no issues. And the idea that you can iterate around this really quickly and resolve those issues. Okay, and let's see if we've got anything more interesting that I can show you here. And here we just got a case of a user already being registered, and we saw that manually, right? So to be realistic here, we got a pretty valuable scan, right? We didn't have to do terribly much, and we got a lot of information just by clicking that scan. And it runs, it's almost real time. It's what 10-15 seconds it takes to run, right? And you're getting a lot of value from that. I'm going to do another one now, which is editing the user info. So I'm going to do, let's just make sure we got all our tokens and the like. So no, we haven't got a token. I'm going to cheat here and just go and use Postman to get me a token quickly. Right, I'm just going to steal that. And I'm going to edit, and I'll just set the auth. Right, so I'm just injecting a token, and I'll get my, what I'm doing here is I'm updating the user information, right? And the user's being updated. Now, I'm going to scan that same endpoint and see what the scan is able to surface. All right, so it looks like that API endpoint's behaving like it should, right? It did sort of the right thing. So we'll just put that auth token in here again, right? And we'll run scan. So 1, 2, 3, 4. It's going to be, now if you watch what's happening, right, we've run the scan. Let's see, we got happy path passed. Okay, so what we were able to do, we got our same error message. User was updated successfully, but we noticed we've got some issues. So let's have a look into those issues. The same thing here, we've got unsupported, the verbs that are being supported and aren't behaving correctly. So we know we need to fix that. Now, on a side note there, it might seem that, this is catastrophic if you've got to go and fix every single endpoint, but those type of flaws are often easily fixed en masse, in bulk, right? You can go and put a custom handler for every single API endpoint. There's easy ways to fix that. You don't have to go one by one. Let's go and have a look into an issue here. So the user updated. So we got a 400. So what we've provided is we've given a value where, I'm just going to look which one it is. Probably the email address is true, right? That doesn't look like an email address, but unfortunately the API passed, right? So that shouldn't have happened, right? So we've easily identified, we've been able to fuzz that input, and we've got something that didn't behave as we wanted. These are all Booleans. Let's have a look at another one. We've probably got a numeric here. We got a 200. We should have had a 400. What have we done here? We've given an account balance of hello world, right? That's obviously not making any sense, but unfortunately API accepted that, right? So we can very easily see that we've got a lot of these corner cases where API isn't doing type validation, but it's accepting data that it shouldn't accept. Sending these all requests, and let's have a look, see here what we've got. So yeah, so these are missing properties, right? There's no email in that body. That's also not conforming to the contract. More of the same, right? So just by running that scan, we ran it almost instantaneously. We've thrown up quite a lot of issues with that API. Right, we've got some OWASP API categories here as well, right? So we're potentially finding some quite serious issues. Right, so that's effectively the scan running, right? So just to reiterate, we're running in your IDE, we're running the full 42 crunch API security scan. We're running 300 and something different rules against that API. We're fuzzing. I'll show you in a moment when we run the scan against the full set of API endpoints, kind of what that looks like, and you can see how much scanning work is going on behind those scenes. Right, so pretty comprehensive work that we've got going on there. So I'll just get rid of these. Let me show you what the audit looks like. So I've got my API definition. This one has issues. It has a lot of issues. You can see from all the squigglies. Now I'm going to run the audit. Right, I just click on that 42 crunch button, and you can see again in very minimal time, we've been able to run an audit on that, and we've got a score of 40 out of 100. We scored particularly badly in the security category, and we also haven't done particularly well on data validation. So what this is doing is it's running our standard rule set against the open API definition that we've presented it with, and we found issues. So we'll start clicking through some of these issues. So what we have here is we have very comprehensive guidance on how to fix these issues. So what are we looking at here? We've got a post method without security defined. We've got guidance on how to fix those. Let me find something around. Yeah, here's an example. Let's go to that. We've got the ability to inject additional properties, which is not best practice. We have the use of an array where we don't specify the bounds of the array, so we don't specify the size. Right, so think of the audit as the flip side to the scan. The scan's doing the runtime, and it's exercising and testing against your audit definition. What the audit plugin here that we're looking at, that's helping you write a better definition to start with. Okay, so I think that it's pretty self-evident what we're doing. We've got other good things like we've got IntelliSense. So here I've got a string. That's not. Let's have a look at what that error is. It's pretty intuitive what that error is. You've defined a string, but you haven't constrained it. And we saw where we had examples of strings where we wanted an email and we gave it hello world and it passed, right? What was the issue? What was the reason for that? The reason was that we should have constrained that type and not allowed that value in the first place. Okay, so where you've got things like string, make sure that you're constraining those with a pattern definition. Here's an example of that pattern definition, but the IntelliSense will allow you to do things like, yeah, and even there if you wanted that. So that's all coming for free with the plugin. That's what the plugin does. Lots of other features. I think what I need to show you in the plugin, you can do. Is it Control F8? Right, you can just skip through. You can skip through all the errors as well. Okay, so at that point, we've had a look at the IDE integration. We've had a look at many of those features, particularly around the scan. We've got a good idea for what we can do. So one thing I'd like to come back to that I'd alluded to when I was speaking about these tools is really to kind of hit home on the value of this. So that scan that I was showing you, the scan that is able to test the API endpoints, and the audit that is able to test the your definition file, those are running here in your IDE, and they're running near instantaneously. But what we can do is you can use those exact same products, the audit and the scan, much further down the pipeline. Right, so you can put these in your CI/CD process, Jenkins, Azure DevOps, GitHub Actions, whatever you want, and then you can scan the entire API. Right, so you scan every single method, every single operation in there. Whereas when you're in the IDE, you're probably doing method by method. People vary. Like some people, it's how people eat their food. Some people like to mix and match. Some people, they want to eat everything in one type. I'm inclined to do function method by method. When I'm writing an API, I'll start with one, I'll implement it, I'll test it, I'll get it working, I'll go on to doing the next one. And this is pretty well suited to to that. You can just test these things one by one. Big advantage there, you're not overwhelmed by having to suddenly now fix 500 different issues. Start small if you're doing greenfield, if it's a new API, and just iterate and build up from that. But what the point that I wanted to make here was that you're using the same scanning tool. So you're not going to be surprised as a developer if you've been using the IDE and then later on you come and you're testing in your CI/CD, your results aren't going to be different. Your results are going to be exactly the same. And my experience of giving developers different results at different stages of the CI/CD, that is something that it really jars with people. They don't like that, right? If you're going to test and measure, be consistent about it. So this is the huge advantage here. You're using that same engine, the same rule sets. What we do in the CI/CD integrations, we add a few more enterprise and governance features, things like rule sets, things like quality gates, things like policy, things like fine-tuning and configuration, but it is the same tool. Right, and I'll actually show that working now. I'm just going to take you over to our platform. And what I've got here is I've got exactly that same API, right? And I've got that running. And what I've done is I've done a full scan on that. So I've audited that entire API. So there's all my paths. Right, there's which one did we have that problem with? Let's just see that edit info. So we can see we've got edit info. All of those methods, we've got the same issues that we found in the IDE. We're now seeing them across the full API in the CI/CD, same issues, right? Exactly the same diagnosis, the same remediation, the same underlying issues, right? So that's the real value of that. We simultaneously are giving you an IDE experience with the audit and your scan. That is free. We talk about, let's actually get onto that, because that's going to be the burning question. How do I get started? QR code galore. Either of those, one will take you straight to the plugin. One will take you to find out more on our platform about those free tools that we have. But that point of you can start yourself in your ID in your local environment. And then if your organization were to become a 42 Crunch customer, you would get that same experience right through the organization, right? And that's what many of our most successful customers are doing, right? They push toward getting developers to embrace and then be able to manage and govern that policy. So we got API-security.io. I'm been chatting to Jose, is the author of the Microservice APIs book. Really good book, a lot of detail in there if you're wanting to learn more about his perspective on microservices. And then I'm also doing my own book on defending APIs against cyber attack with Packet Publishing, and that'll be out later this year. We have available more free resources for you. We have a blueprint for success. That's my guide that I've authored on how to get started and up and running with APIs. That's available for download. There's a lot of good content in there. And then just finding out more about 42 Crunch and seeing us in person. We're at RSA this year from April the 24th to the 27th. We're over in Copenhagen at the Nordic CISO Summit, and then also in Rotterdam at Feyenoord Stadium. We are talking about APIs on May the 9th. So look forward to seeing folk at one of those events. Just to reiterate, you can get started with this for free right now. Both that scan, that's the new feature we've enabled, and the editing and the auditing capability is there. There are links to the free tools. We will, and as I said, the other important thing is we're doing a series now. We're going to have more features on exactly what Open API can do for you. But it's not all about security. It's not all about helping, doing security auditing and testing. We're going to talk about how you can do code generation, how you can do documentation, how you can do your mocking and your stub frameworks. So a lot we've got coming up on the topic of Open API definitions. We are going to close the session, and again, thank you for attending. Great to see so many people joining in on this. As always, you can find me online. More than happy to answer questions. So have a good day.